So you're in a leadership meeting, your founder or CEO looks around and says, we need a budget for next year. We need to start the budgeting process. Everyone nods. And then someone turns to you, the finance lead, and says, can we get started on the budget? And your brain maybe instantly goes, great, I'll open up Excel, dump in all the actuals, and start working on the model. Stop right there. If you're doing this, you are skipping some of the most important parts of a budgeting process and really setting yourself up for a lot of firefighting, a lot of budget presentations where you don't get much of a buy-in. So really a budget isn't just a bunch of numbers that you pull together. It really is a strategic document, particularly, well, especially in a startup where you have really limited resources. And to achieve certain goals, you need to make sure that you're using those limited resources the best way. So if the goals aren't clear, or even worse, they haven't been agreed upon, then this whole process of you budgeting could potentially be a waste of time. So what I wanted to go through today is how to build a better startup budget for finance leaders. Hi, my name's Alysha Randall. I am a fractional CFO for Fast Growth Consulting, and I also train new and aspiring CFOs within startups and scale-ups. I built a book on this exact topic, Financial Leadership Fundamentals, How to Become a CFO in a Startup or Scale-Up. And today I want to go through the budgeting process long before you actually start budgeting or creating the model. So if you are an accountant within a startup or scale up and hoping to become or already are a new finance leader within a startup and scale up, click on the subscribe button below. I do a video every single week. So the first thing I want you to think about is you want to start with strategy and not with a spreadsheet. So before you even think about the numbers, you have to ask the business, or maybe ask yourself, because you might even know the answer, what is the company trying to achieve next year? So if you don't know the answer to that, that really means sitting down with the CEO or founder and leadership team and really getting aligned on your growth targets, whether that's revenue, users, GMV, ARR, profit versus growth trade-offs, because again, you have limited resources, fundraising timelines, whether that's seed, series A, debt raise, series B, whatever it is, you need to understand what that is. And any major investments. So that is big new hires, doubling a team or a C-suite, product lines, are you adding to the product or services that you're offering? Expansion, are you going to new markets, whether that's international or new markets within your own regions? All of these strategic decisions need to be decided long before you even open up a spreadsheet. So the answers to all of these questions, they need to be documented and agreed upon with the leadership team. And ultimately, these become your main KPIs. So when you've put your budget together at the end, you can check that this financial plan hits those strategic goals. So if the leadership team, for example, is saying double revenue, but it's also saying we want to stay cash flow positive or break even, potentially that's a bit of a tension that you need to resolve before you start budgeting. So the output of this step is you want a one-page summary of the 3 to 5 high-level company goals that everyone agrees needs to be achieved next year. Number 2, gather each team's operational plan. So next you want to meet with each department head and ask them, what are your team's top 3 priorities for next year? What's changing from this year and what's staying the same? What new resources, whether that's people or tool or supplies that you need basically, and what KPIs will you be accountable for? Or rather, what KPIs are you going to be tracking to make sure that you hit all of these goals? And it's worthwhile making note of these because this might be interesting also for your management accounts. So having these conversations, it gives you a realistic view of what the business actually plans to do in a bit more detail rather than just at the strategic level, rather than just looking at what everyone did last year. So you don't want to assume that marketing wants to double spend necessarily, particularly if it's not aligned with the strategy. You don't want to guess that tech will say stay flat. It often doesn't. You want to ask, basically. So this is a real big part of establishing your business partner relationships if you haven't already. I will say I have talked about strategic business partnering. If you're interested, I'll leave a link above for that and you can have a look at that. But ultimately, your output here is you want that department level inputs for hiring, tools, marketing spend, product launches, all those sort of things. So it's turning those strategic goals into a bit more detail. If you find that potentially some of the operational goals don't quite align with the strategic goals and it could spend additional resources on something that doesn't quite get there, then you have the time at this earlier stage to have those conversations. The department may need to do these particular steps for other reasons. Compliance is one that comes to mind. Or they may need to change their priorities for the following year so that they're aligned with the strategic goals. So that's something you need to be mindful as you go through this process. Number 3 is create a timeline and workflow. So budgeting and startups can be super messy. You absolutely need structure or it can drag on for months. Or worse, you may have a lot of internal politics to deal with, such as people not understanding what is required of them, people not being available potentially that you need to work into your plan. So you really want to create a budgeting calendar with key deadlines. I've put an example here, but obviously what is relevant to you may be slightly different, but you might want to spend week 1 getting the strategic goals aligned, week 2 to 3 getting your department inputs, week 4 to be the initial draft, 4 to 5 depending on how long it takes, week 5 to 6 to be going through the reviews and making certain adjustments, and then say week 7 or 8 you want to have then a board ready version along with the internal version. So you may want to use tools that you already have internally to help with that calendar. You could just use Google Sheets or email as long as it's tracked. Or if you use a tool like Notion or Asana or whatever it is, then it might be worthwhile doing that. I do want to say that when you're working with departments and asking for their input, you do want to make it quite lightweight. You don't want to be asking department heads to give you huge amounts of information. There's some instances where that might be relevant, but ideally you don't want them to be putting together a finance model. You just want budget headlines and headcount assumptions. Sometimes with marketing, if you have quite a complex marketing sales funnel with lots of different channels, the marketing team may have quite a detailed model, but in general, that's the only department that I've worked with that has quite a detailed model. So you really do need to think about how much you're asking from each of the department heads. There's a fine balance between not enough information and too much. Number 4 is you want to be quite clear on constraints. So every startup has constraints. The most common ones, as I kind of mentioned, cash runway. How long is it until we run out of money? Number 2 is headcount limits. So how many new hires can you actually afford? And number 3 is time. So can we execute this roadmap with the team that we have? So they're kind of the 3 big challenges for every startup, really. So if you have a 12-month runway, and no confirmed raise, then you're not really going to be budgeting for quite an aggressive hiring plan. If you're launching to a new market, you want to make sure that marketing, ops, and finance are all on the same page. So these are some of the things that you really need to think about as you're working with all of your business partners and also the leadership team. I would say if you can, you want to build some simple cash runway models early. You don't want to leave that right to the end because then potentially the whole company has done all of this work, and right at the end you realize you can't afford this plan. So try and build a simple cash runway as early as possible and just keep tinkering with that as more information comes through. Number 5 is you really do want to agree on a format and review process. So this may be something you can talk about with the founder, CEO, right at the beginning. So who's going to sign up on the final numbers? It's generally the founder. What's the format? So are you going to have one version, so like the base case or phase scenarios? You might find that you just spend a lot of time on the base case. Once that's signed off, you and say the founder may then just do the worst case and stretch case scenario. The stretch case scenario may want to work with your sales team, because the stretch case sales targets may be what they communicate to their sales team. What's the budget for? So, just confirming that you've got the internal use, board approval. Do you need board approval, or do they just need visibility? Does it need to be sent to the investors? Have a look at your shareholder agreement to check what your requirements are there. And then, as I mentioned, you need to decide stretch case, base case, conservative version, all three. What do the board need? What does the founders need? And just establishing that early. You want to avoid endless versions by ideally locking the scopes quite early. Number 6, this is when you can actually start putting the budget model. So you can now open Excel or Google Sheets or your budgeting software, whatever you're doing. You have your top-down targets from the leadership team. You have your bottom-up inputs from each team. And you want to build in checks for cash, hiring, gross margin, EBITDA. So this is obviously where your finance skills shine, but you have to do the strategic work, steps 1 to 5 first. And then finally, you want to test it with scenarios. So once your base case is built, you want to test what happens if revenue is 20% lower. What happens is fundraising is delayed by 6 months, for example. What if hiring takes longer than planned and therefore certain projects will be delayed? These are kind of the scenarios that the founder, CEO, and board really care about. You obviously will look personally a lot more strategic if you've already got the answers to those particular questions. So if your founder, CEO says we need a budget, you don't want to respond with a spreadsheet. Really, you want to respond with a question. You want to say, great, can we first align on the strategic goals and key priorities first? And if you do that, that's how you move from, say, a finance manager to a real strategic leader. So if you want to become a confident and strategic finance leader in a startup within the next 12 months, here is your plan. Number 1 is to subscribe to this YouTube channel for weekly practical tips where I talk about how to be a strong finance leader within a startup. Number 2 is to check out my book, Financial Leadership Fundamentals. Here you get a real clear understanding of what's expected of you and how you can really show up as a leader at the end of every single chapter at actions that you can implement immediately. And number 3 is to have a look at the Financial Leadership Fundamentals course that can really fast track your growth as a finance leader and help you with all that strategy, ideas and work that you can implement in the real world. So thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you found that useful, as we are right in the thick of budgeting season, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks.